Hey, everybody. Welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy.
She's like this. You sent...
I don't know. I think that's the most intelligent thing I've ever heard him say.
I really just thought it sounded like he was doing something you're not supposed to see.
That was a 10. That was a 10 out of 10.
12.
It was an 11.
12. What do you think he actually meant, though, by...
I say we put into the Matt translator.
I think he's just mentally ill, and we're trying to figure out what he's trying to think, and that's not something that we can figure out.
Could you imagine if Barack Obama or Joe Biden or anybody running potentially even in 2028, if any Democrat ever stood in front of an audience and acted this way?
In Trump's defense, he was not wearing a tan suit, so there is that.
Is he wearing a diaper?
He's always wearing a diaper. Everyone notices it. It's like a giant blob on the back of his ass.
Did you guys see when he went on like Fox Morning Show, whatever, and they had that black towel under his ass? Did you see the clip of that? And
No.
It's all over the internet. And they're like, why does he have a black towel under his ass?
I do want to make a correction. I want to say that he's allegedly wearing a diaper. Many people say he's wearing a diaper. I don't know if he's wearing a diaper.
Okay.
Thank you for that clarification.
Maddie's being right. Look, Maddie does not want to get sued for defamation.
That's fair.
Or diaperation. We have legal scholar Dr. Marianne Franks with us today. We'll chat with her in just a little bit. But we got to start with this revolution that took place up in New York this week. Mm-hmm. Just to sort of rehash what happened. We had a hat trick for New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani, who threw his clout, his support, his machine behind three candidates running in the Democratic primaries, and they all won. This includes organizer Darializa Avila Chevalier, who narrowly defeated five-term incumbent Representative Adriano Espaillat in the 13th District. This was the biggest upset since AOC defeated Joseph Crowley in 2018. Also included former controller Brad Lander beating incumbent Congressman Dan Goldman 66-34 in the 10th District, and State Representative Claire Valdez, who ran for the seat being vacated by the retiring Nydia Velázquez in the 7th District. And Velázquez had endorsed Brooklyn Borough President Antonio Reynoso. So that is New York, okay? And I got everybody talking about Mamdani becoming the new kingmaker. The Democratic Socialist Party is the new Democrat Party. Like, this is it. This is the movement. The pendulum has swung all the way to the left, signaling where the Democratic Party is headed, especially as we veer towards the critical midterm elections. But wait, there's more. There is a counter narrative to what happened in New York. Because there were also three other prominent victories across the country on Tuesday. Former Congressman Ben McAdams in Utah's 1st District, he won. Nancy LaCour, the former Navy admiral fired by Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, she won in South Carolina's 1st District. And former combat veteran and national security official Kate Conley, who's been on this podcast a couple of times, she won in New York's 17th District and will be facing off against Mike Lawler. And what do those three candidates have in common, you ask?
They are moderate.
They are not Democrat socialists. But wait, there's even more. And you ask what that is?
Oh, what is that?
They actually can move the needle. The Democrats taking back the House. We also have to not forget what happened last fall with Abigail Spanberger winning the governorship in Virginia. Same with Mikey Sherrill in New Jersey. This is happening across the country. We're seeing all kinds of candidates who come from moderate and even military and intelligence backgrounds. This is what's going to move the needle in the House flipping. Unfortunately, after this election, the sexy narrative in the media is, whoa, look what's happening in New York City. Oh, kingmaker. Oh, Democratic Socialists. Oh, look what's happening. Oh, which does nothing but feed into the Republican narrative, which is basically saying to voters as we approach this very critical election, Is this what you want controlling Congress? These radical left-wing capitalism-hating freaks? These lunatics, these fringe lunatics? But that's not actually what's happening. In reality, here's the thing that I think is the real narrative. They can't drive a wedge through us, through our party, because we do have a big tent. Whether you're a progressive or a moderate, we share so many of the same ideals. We want affordable housing. We all want better/cheaper health care. We want a stronger economy with lower inflation. We want solid job growth. We want immigration reform, gun reform, abortion and reproductive rights, income equality, and higher taxes on corporations and the wealthy. Those are all things, whether you're a progressive or a so-called moderate, you want. Now, there's some differences on some foreign policy. Obviously, I think these elections in New York, a lot of it was a referendum on Israel, post-October 7th and Gaza. But where it really counts in this country, there's not much difference, policy-wise, between progressives and the moderates.
I think that it's important to note that childcare is part of this equation also, because we believe that women have a choice. They can work, they can stay at home, but they really can't unless there's a place for the children to go to, which still falls mainly in the women's arena. And that's not something that is an issue for Republicans. And that's actually a very, very, very large factor that I think we should be talking more about.
I think what you said is essentially correct. It's New York. It's not Virginia. It's not New Jersey. It's other places are different. I do think that what this represents is Democratic frustration with the sort of Chuck Schumer part of the party, where you feel very frustrated that the response to Trump has been subdued, to say the least. Not that there are no Democrats doing it, but the party elders they're done with them. And I think this is also that.
Yeah, I think that's true in part, but I think we all have to be honest here, and that these elections were about Israel, about Gaza,
Sure.
Absolutely.
about genocide, about occupation, about colonizing, and that's okay. I don't agree with a lot of that stuff. I think there's a lot of people. Dan Goldman is actually someone who says, I'm not really in favor of a lot of what Israel has done since October 7th, but I'm not ready to call it a genocide. Like, there's so many different opinions in the Jewish community. And these elections in New York City clearly were about those rifts where, you know, if I said to you 4 years ago, there's going to be a pro-Israel incumbent Jewish congressman who represents the Upper West Side, the West Village, he's going to lose his seat because he's pro-Israel, you would have said I was crazy. You would have said you're absolutely nuts. But that's what happened. There's no room anymore in our politics on the left or the right for nuance, you know? And so that's what we saw. I think what is dangerous for Mamdani in this election, though, is that he shifted his overall strategy. Mamdani won on a broad coalition. He won last year with the support of the young, white gentrifiers, right? And the minorities. And one of the reasons he won with minorities is that there were people like Espelat, who was an early supporter of Mamdani, who Mamdani promised to return that support. And he ended up supporting Chevalier. And so Mamdani in this election served to make a choice with his support to continue going with the young, white gentrifiers in these districts. And there are people in the Black and Hispanic, Puerto Rican, Dominican communities, which make up a good chunk of these working class districts, who are now like, what the fuck? We threw our support behind this guy. Someone like Nydia Velázquez endorses Antonio Reynoso, or Adriano Espelat, who promised us if we support Mamdani in his race for mayor, that he will look after us. There's a lot of people who are now looking at that and going, well, he just drove a wedge through his own coalition, which could be a very dangerous thing for him politically.
Yeah, I don't know. We're just going to have to see. Time will tell. Time will also tell on these candidates and how they actually legislate.
Yeah,
I
think
agree. I think you have to see, about the policy.
But I
how
think,
they
two
execute.
things scream obvious right now, to your point. Number one, Mamdani's foreign policy views. He's going to have some influence with 3 Congress people who are going to be in the House in January. So what does that end up looking like? Who knows? The other thing is that the squad has just almost doubled, right?
Mm-hmm.
Our pendulum politically has swung so far to the right that in order for people like me to ever feel comfortable that we're somewhere kind of in the middle again someday, I do think the pendulum does on some level have to swing so far to the left. You know what I mean? Like, then when we start having some control again, we can get back to being a party where everything isn't on one extreme or the other.
Well, that's the secret sauce, and continues to be the secret sauce of someone like Bernie Sanders.
Yeah. Or even AOC.
and
Look
the-
at where
and the-
she is today and
that's
how,
right.
how she's changed and evolved in her positions.
But
you
also
know.
the consistency and how authentic folks are about, stating that their interests are their interests. It's the working class interests. And that's not to be discounted.
No, I do think affordability was a motivator for sure. But again, I think a lot of this had to do with Israel. And it's hard to look at Mamdani and his support for these particular candidates is what, for those who feared him winning the election, this is what they were afraid of.
Yeah.
What that ends up looking like, I don't know. But, if you do a little bit of a deep dive into Chevalier's past, she's got some pretty horrible statements that she's made. And that's concerning. So I'm not convinced yet that Mamdani, and therefore by extension those he supported, are not largely driven by the Israeli situation.
I don't think anybody in this room could argue with you.
No. Well,
Of course it was driven by the Israeli situation. I mean, it's more broad than that. I think that there is a tremendous pushback against candidates that are supported by AIPAC, because AIPAC is perceived, I think rightly so, as having undue influence on our politics. And so any candidate that was perceived to be AIPAC related, especially in the case of Goldman, was going to be hit hard in this situation.
yeah, but I think we have to my earlier point, keep a proper perspective here. Zoran Mamdani is not going to be a kingmaker on a national level. He may have proven this week that he has a lot of clout in New York. But when you look at the fact that 531,000 New Yorkers voted in this year's primary, that's a turnout rate of 1 in 6 registered Democratic voters, but roughly the same total number of voters in the primary of June 2022. But even more significant, less than half of the primary voters last year in the mayoral primary voted Tuesday. Less than half.
Well,
And the turnout rates for under 34, also less than half of 2025. What does this mean? I don't know beyond the obvious, so I'd like to stick with the obvious. The obvious conclusion, at least at this point, can be made that the Mamdani effect in engaging and turning out young people was pretty much limited to him and his campaign. What that means, I don't know. But I would like to think that these same people who got up really early and went to vote for Mamdani are going to be there in November. I'm not convinced they will be, because they typically aren't.
Well, I don't know if comparing it to his primary is too relevant, because he was a generational, once-in-a-generation figure. There's no one in this primary that was unbelievably compelling to people like Mamdani was as a
No,
character.
but the point I'm making is, was there an effect that would play out in future elections where he wasn't involved? Did the Gen Z voter wake up and go, wow, I'm engaged now. I want to be in this political game. And look what my vote did. My voice mattered. The numbers don't bear that out for this election this week.
Yeah, I don't know yet what to take from the numbers, but primaries have low turnouts. That much is true.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And then you're just saying like, okay, we're back to.
No, I'm saying that he
which
was
is my
able
point.
to.
We're agreeing then.
Well, he was able to sway voters who were not young, is what you're telling me. And that actually is more compelling to me than just the young people coming out. It means that people who would normally have voted for somebody else, like a Goldman, have been convinced. That means that the Democratic core base, and not just new young voters,
Yes.
are actually changing their mind.
But typical core base and low turnout for the most part overall, and a non-engaged Gen Z is it's not very exciting.
I don't think
to
that
me heading into
primaries for Congress people are not going to be a big engagement. You have to. The midterms are going to be substantially different for young people.
We hope. We hope. All right. Let's get to our winners and losers.
My winner, finally, a judge orders the government to release the rest of the Epstein files in a lawsuit filed by Katie Fang. My loser, Poetica Coffee. They can go fuck themselves for their anti-Semitic post about Congressman Dan Goldman, especially since their website credo is, whoever walks through the door is treated with unconditional dignity. I hope their business dies quickly and painfully.
Wow. Good for you, Jen Hamoud.
Thank you.
You're in quite a Hamoud today.
Yes, I am. That made me so angry.
My winner is, of course, Zohran Mamdani. All three congressional candidates that he endorsed swept their primaries Tuesday, two of them ousting incumbents. And on Thursday, his rent board froze the rent on 1 million apartments, the first 2-year freeze in New York City history. My loser is HHS Secretary RFK Jr. He swore under oath that he would do nothing to discourage vaccines, then did exactly that. New documents tie his 2019 Samoa trip to a measles outbreak that killed 83, most of them children, while the U.S. now faces its worst measles outbreak in decades.
My winner, the Democratic Party, which, heading towards the midterms, has record turnout, a 14-point enthusiasm lead, a big tent of voters who cannot wait to vote against Trump, and the complicit Republican Congress. My loser, the Republican Senate, which, in its pathetic 24-hour vote flip on an Iran war powers resolution after Daddy yelled at them, continues to demonstrate vomitous, cowardly fealty to its king. Which definitely brings us to the weekly rant. Dear MAGA and independent voters, we are just 5 months away from the most critical election in our history. An election that will decide whether we may have a democracy over the next 2.5 years. Whether the economy will be strong, whether inflation will come down, whether new jobs will be created, whether we'll be able to afford housing, healthcare insurance, gas, groceries, and other goods and services, whether we'll be a nation at peace or at war, whether we'll operate under the rule of law or lawlessness and corruption at the highest levels of government, whether criminals and pedophiles will be held accountable. Just think, we are a nation at war overseas, and at war with an affordability crisis here at home. Yet we have a neutered, do-nothing, cowardly Republican Congress, and a president who spends his time and our taxpayer money on drama and chaos, and who in just the last week has posted photo comparisons of Senator John Ossoff and Pee Wee Herman, James Tallarico and Mad Magazine's Alfred E. Newman, has made up a ridiculous vandalism lie about his reflecting pool disaster, has pulled his DNI nomination of Jay Clayton, and has canceled the rare bipartisan housing aid bill in an attempt to coerce Congress into passing his election-stealing SAVE Act. This is a president swirling in a perpetual vortex of victimhood, where every election is rigged, every news article is fake, every poll is biased, every investigation was a witch hunt. Every prosecution was a conspiracy. Every judge is corrupt. Every anti-Trump Republican is a rhino. Every criticism is unfair. Every critic hates America. Every failure is someone else's fault. Many of you think all of this makes total sense because you believe Trump is not only the greatest president ever, but that the election system, every court, every judge, every prosecutor, every DA, every attorney general, the DOJ, the FBI, Democrats, Rhino Republicans, independents, the media, they were all or are all united in a big, fat, giant conspiracy to destroy this truly honest, innocent, great man who consistently puts his own interests behind those of the American people. But, and this is a big-ass but, does this really sound logical to you? Really? Really? Think about it. Make believe it's your kid who got expelled from school for stealing a laptop. He pleads with you that it's all a lie, fake, a witch hunt, a huge conspiracy against him, and that the district superintendent, the principal, the teachers, the guidance counselor, students, everyone who witnessed it, they're all lying. Everyone. He's the only one telling the truth about what happened. And that even the video cameras that recorded it all actually instead show him helping people and spreading love instead of stealing something. How would you react? Would you say, "Mommy and Daddy are so sorry you're being treated so unfairly," and then sue the school? Or would you take away his phone and ground him for a year? Exactly. Well, perhaps you should apply the same logic when it comes to Donald Trump. And while you're at it, also think about how the weak, feckless Republican cowards in Congress have done nothing but excuse, enable, defend, and protect this madman and his madness. But you know what? You can punish them in November and give control of the House and Senate back to the party that's actually trying to help you. All right, let's get to Dr. Marianne Franks. She is a legal scholar, advocate, and award-winning author specializing in the intersection of civil rights, free speech, and technology. She is the Eugene L. and Barbara A. Bernard Professor in Intellectual Property, Technology, and Civil Rights Law at George Washington Law School, where she teaches and writes about First and Second Amendment law, family law, and criminal law and procedure. She also serves as the President and Legislative and Tech Policy Director of the Cyber Civil Rights Initiative, a nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting privacy, expression, and autonomy in the digital age. She is the author of Fearless Speech, Breaking Free from the First Amendment, and The Cult of the Constitution, Our Deadly Devotion to Guns and Free Speech. Marianne, welcome into the back room.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to start with the breaking news yesterday from the Supreme Court. There were two major immigration rulings, both for Trump. The first was on ending temporary protected status, which will affect about 350,000 Haitians and Syrians and migrants from other countries. And also the second one was about blocking asylum seekers at the southern border. What are your takeaways on these very critical, consequential rulings?
Well, I haven't had a chance to really look at all the details in these rulings, but it's more of the same incredibly depressing news from this court. I mean, it's clear at this point that we have an incredibly politicized court. It is one that is really quite shameless at this point in its rulings, strictly, I think, on the grounds that it's trying to do what Trump wants. And I say, of course, I'm talking about the conservative supermajority and not the liberal dissenters. But it is very disappointing, if not surprising, that we keep getting these rulings that are chipping away at all of the values and principles that I think Americans used to be able to be somewhat proud of. And so it's depressing, but not surprising.
Yeah, and especially when the rulings relate to immigration, the language that's used, or perhaps not used, it's as if the conservatives on the court are not talking about human beings. You know?
I think that's right. I think we're seeing that in a lot of these cases, that for many people on the court, and this is coming reinforced by the Trump administration itself, there's an increasingly large category of individuals that this regime, right, this ruling class, does not see as human beings and does not want other people to see as human beings. And it's chilling to anybody who knows anything about history when we see that those categories, that sense of trying to set any person beyond the bounds of recognition, so whether that's social recognition or legal recognition, we all know where that leads.
Yeah, and it's just also so hard not to view this. I know this is a powerful word, but through the lens of racism. This ruling was handed down because the conservative justices didn't see any racial animus in the administration's positions or actions. And that was so upsetting to Elena Kagan that in her dissent, she literally cited Trump's actual words, his quotes about Haiti being a shithole country, about why do we have all these immigrants coming from Haiti and Somalia? Why can't we have immigrants coming from Norway and Sweden? Well, guess what? What color are the people that come from those 4 countries? And that Haitians have AIDS and that they're destroying America. I mean, it's just, Alito and the conservatives, they're not dumb people. They're super smart, brilliant even. So they're either just absolutely in denial as racists, or they're, I know we don't like to use that racist word because it's ugly and it says something that is very ugly about America today. But how do you escape that?
Well, I think that part of the reason why you get this fairly head-spinning kind of decision, and I am grateful that Justice Kagan did what she did and saying, you want to call this not racial. And part of the reason that you are doing this, or maybe the reason that you can even say that, is because you won't actually even quote the words that are at issue here. And so let's look at what those are. And I think that was a really telling moment, because I don't think you can make that kind of claim when you've got the words in front of you. So I think what that indicates is this is a court that is fully aware of the racial implications of what it is doing and saying. But there has been a really longstanding effort on the part of many people in this country in particular to try to make the accusation of racism worse than the act of being racist. And it's been incredibly effective. And we've got to the point now where you're able to reconstruct the notion of being a racist in such a way that it's emptied out of all meaning. And so when you have people just changing words like that, when you have the most powerful people in the country changing words like that, it is emptying all of our concepts of any real meaning. And it's one of those many reminders in our current moment that there is so much about American history that we have never fully confronted, that we never completed the job of reconstruction. We never confronted the kind of original sins of the founding of this country. And we can see all of that in such, I think, clear detail right now.
Yeah, it's a very disturbing and dangerous trend, because we see other rulings that have come out of SCOTUS recently on redistricting and essentially gutting the Voting Rights Act of 65. We see public schools that are now being forced to erase the history that you just spoke about. Slavery, like, what's that? And it's the same kind of thing where we run the risk in a few years of our young people not understanding or even knowing about slavery, much in the same way the Holocaust is disappearing.
What really does make it clear how these things work together, right? Exactly what you said about the concerted effort to rid our schools, rid our education of our history, to sort of strip all of that out from our cultural consciousness. That's very deliberate, right? Because if you are taught those things, if you understand what really did happen, then you can see the obscenity of what's being said right now. But that's why those two things always have to go together, that denial of what reality is, and that attempt to erase history and to ensure that younger generations don't even have the chance to know what really did happen. So if there is any, there certainly is no silver lining here, but if there is something to learn from this, is that it's making that so much more obvious. Whereas I think in previous iterations of far-right movements, of conservatism, of the kind of neoliberal takeover of our government, it has been much more hidden, that there's been something fairly subtle about it, or it's been difficult to track. And now I think it's quite obvious there's a spectacle that we can point to and we can say, this is what's happening right now.
Yeah. One of the other remaining consequential cases at the Supreme Court is birthright citizenship, also on immigration. That one seems crystal clear to anyone who understands the Constitution and the language that's in it. Where do you think that's going to end up?
I'm always hesitant to predict what this court is going to do, given the fact that this is it's a lawless court. It's a purely political court. But I do think there's good reason to be confident that this is one decision that they will not exactly go along with the Trump administration on. And that's part of the reason. I think we've seen this in previous sessions where the court will give a couple of good, and I'm using that word really loosely here, good rulings, that not terrible rulings.
Like the tariff ruling.
Yeah, exactly, right. As a way of preserving its own legitimacy, right? That there are certain things that I think this court, the Roberts Court, is calculating that they can do that will seem oppositional to the Trump regime to make it seem as though there really is some kind of independence here. So I think I'm only positive about the potential outcome here because of that sense that will probably be the case, right? That we're going to get from this court, the supermajority, that attempts to say, well, we're a reasonable court after all. I mean, it still won't be unanimous, I'm sure, but it will attempt to wrestle with an issue that no one should have wrestled with. And it's this whole debacle that we've got of anyone even bringing this up as a serious interpretation of the Constitution. But you will get the whole dramatics of the court saying, well, we've taken this very seriously and we've decided to come out this way. And I do think it'll be good in the sense that it won't be the terrible ruling that I think the Trump administration would want, but it will be bad in the sense that it will be this play acting, this attempt to legitimize what is otherwise an illegitimate court.
Yeah. I mean, part of it for me also, it seems like they know they can't. Like with tariffs, the language was so clear, is so clear. And I could almost see them sitting in a room going, how do we get out of this? We can't. It's so clear. You know, like with the ruling yesterday, they parsed a word. It was like when Clinton said the definition of is. I forget the word, but they were able to find the word that they can somehow twist. But it just seems like with birthright citizenship, which was the case with tariffs, the language is so crystal clear that I just think like they can't find the out. But we'll see.
One hopes, but I do worry because even what you've described, I think, is a more rational process than I suspect is happening at the court. Because I think we've seen cases where it's an obvious result and they have nonetheless found some way, right, to make it a non-obvious result. And so what I worry about is that if this decision comes out the right way, then again, the court will be saying, well, you see, we have a process, right? And when something's really over the line, when something really is out of step with the Constitution, you see, we get the right result. But that is my concern, is that there will be this will be the kind of gaslighting project that the court has continued to have for decades now, which is, you know, we are at the same time clearly, right, I think in certain cases, being irrational, being completely politicized, being completely we are unmoored from any kind of real constitutional analysis. But at the same time, look at us being reasonable, look at us being a real court. And I really do worry about what that does to the psyche of Americans who are trying to believe or wanting to believe that our institutions still have some kind of real meaning and some kind of real legitimacy.
Yeah. Well, we'll hopefully find out next week. In your bio, it says you specialize in the intersection of civil rights, free speech, and technology. I'd even throw politics into that mix. So what does that look like in real terms in 2026?
Well, it doesn't look good. This is the reason why I study the things that I study is largely because these are all the things that I worry about. Worry about generally in the world, but worry particularly about the fate of certain issues and of certain populations in this country. And I worry about the convergence of technology, the convergence of certain misuses of constitutional doctrine, the politicization that pretends like it's not politicization. I worry about how all of those things interact and how they are manipulated and distorted in a way that isn't just bad for in terms of the results that we get for the country, but it's also bad because of how much it misleads the public, right? How dysfunctional it is as a way of trying to do society, as a way of trying to do law, right? That we are creating a world that is completely incoherent, except if the ruling principle is certain elites win every time. And that's what really concerns me.
Mm-hmm. So free speech, especially today, seems on some level misunderstood, even abused. I know it's been 235 years, but what should we believe the founding fathers intended when they drafted the First Amendment? And how should it protect our free speech rights versus having them be violated and exploited for political and or religious purposes?
Well, I think we have to back up and ask ourselves if that's the right question. This is often how we are told we should interpret the Constitution. That is, what was the intent, right? I'm someone who comes from the field of literary analysis as well as philosophy, and I always think about literary interpretations of trying to interpret what the author intended, right? And in my own view, I think that is not just perhaps an illegitimate method and for other reasons, but it's also kind of a fool's errand. We can't possibly know what someone intended, right? Whether that's one person even writing a novel versus several people who are putting together a compromise document that they weren't even supposed to be putting together. So I think to some extent we need to confront the irrationality of that pursuit, that there isn't a way for us to have access to the author's intent, or at least not to a full picture of the author's intent. But even if we could, I think what we know about the founding fathers or the framers of the Constitution, which should give us pause about whether or not we'd want to defer to that intent. It seems clear that if we are being serious about trying to reconstruct that era in history, we know what that means. And that's one of the reasons why the Supreme Court's turn to history and tradition is so alarming. It is an attempt to say, well, let's go back to that moment where there was the birth of the nation, as it were. And that looks very much like what it is, which is it is wealthy, white, male individuals deciding for themselves that they are going to commit the entire country to certain principles that they really only believe apply in terms of their benefits to them. So if we are really trying to be honest about what we think they meant by the First Amendment, well, they meant that they thought that white, wealthy men could speak freely up to a certain point, right? Because as we know, it only took a few years for the Congress to completely violate exactly what it had set out for itself, what the framers had set out in the First Amendment to say that Congress shall make no law prohibiting freedom of speech. They immediately passed Alien Sedition Acts that attempted to punish criticism of the government. Or they did in fact pass those. So in other words, I think when we ask ourselves, what does the First Amendment mean? We have to ask more than what did the framers intend? Because if we are able to look at what the framers intended, the answer is pretty grim. And it's essentially what is happening right now, which is give those kinds of powers, give the benefits of those rights and privileges to the people who have always put themselves at the top of the hierarchy and wanted to exclude everyone else.
That's such a fascinating perspective. I never thought of it that way, because it's hard to accept that America in 2026 in many ways is operating the way it was in 1791.
It is. And one of the hard things about this, or maybe I'll turn this into something more positive. One of the illuminating things about this is it helps explain why we are where we are. When I was mentioning the kind of distortions and the dysfunction of legal applications and legal doctrine, again, if you think about it, if you were to approach the Supreme Court decisions, for instance, with a predictive principle of how is this going to come out in any given case, if you were trying to apply originalism, or if you were trying to apply the actual doctrine that is developed over hundreds of years, if you were going to apply the precedent that the court itself has set out, if you were going to apply a straightforward textual reading, you would not get accurate results in terms of what the court is actually doing. Or you would be more wrong. You would be more wrong than you would be right. But if you were to start from the principle of what is going to benefit the people who have always had the most power in this country, you would be probably right almost all the time in terms of predicting what the Supreme Court will do. And that's very telling.
Talk about how technology is amplifying harassment, intimidation, disinformation, and are the social media platforms simply reflecting society's problems, or are they actively reshaping our democracy in dangerous ways?
I mean, it's always both. These are companies that now have become so influential in all of our lives that there really isn't a real separation between what I think, certain generations would have thought of as offline versus online. We're sort of in a seamless dystopia, right, when it comes to what is technologically mediated and what is not. Everything is mediated through technology. Now, can that be good? Potentially could be if the people who were making the technology and using the technology were responsible and compassionate and empathetic and all of those things. I think we could potentially have a better society because of the technology that has been developed. But we don't really have those things. We have people who are mostly concerned about profit. We have people who are mostly concerned about exploiting other people for their own benefit. And when those people are in charge, and they're in charge not just at these tech companies, but they're in charge in our politics, they're in charge of our industries, then you get this convergence of really terrible motivations and a really powerful domination of all of those outcomes that have the illusion of independence, right? So what I mean is, think about how at the inauguration, Trump's second inauguration, who he was surrounded by, right? It was all of the tech titans around him. And keeping in mind that only a few years before that, at least some of these heads of these companies had indicated that they would try to serve the interests of democracy against authoritarian trends. And all of them in the last few years have fallen into line to essentially do Trump's bidding or to promise to do Trump's bidding, whether responding to threats that Trump has made against them or in the expectation of benefits that they're going to receive if they do what Trump wants. That's really chilling, and we've never seen anything like that before. We've never had a president who himself owns a social media company that he uses as his own propaganda channel and benefits from it financially, not just benefits rhetorically, but benefits financially. We've never had a president install the owner of a major social media platform into the government and give him essentially unlimited power to do with that position what he wanted. We've never really seen this close collaboration between an administration and surveillance technology and these companies who are hoping for contracts, who are producing more and more radical technology in the service of authoritarian ends. We've never really seen that blending, I think, of government and technology before. It's a kind of blending that others have referred to as techno-fascism, the sense that the government is going to pull along all of its major technological forces in service of its agenda. And I think that is what we're seeing right now. So on top of all the problems we had prior to the Trump administrations, and there were certainly many of them, you already had all these, the amplification in technology, especially through social media, of the worst instincts of human beings, which is to not only to hurt people, to exploit people, to harass people, but also just to be uninformed and reactive, right? That social media tells us, don't worry about the substance, don't take time, don't reflect, don't learn about what you're about to comment on, just react. And it's incentivized over and over again because that's why that is the only way that social media companies make money, is if people are angry enough and engaged enough to fight with each other. So they keep you in this constant state of sort of a cage match, with other people. And that can't be good for democracy because none of those instincts and none of those habits are ones that get you a reflective, compassionate society.
Yeah, there's a passage in the new book, Regime Change, by Maggie Haberman and Jonathan Swan, that recounts when Zuckerberg went down to Mar-a-Lago sometime after Trump won. And Trump was holding court, and he had his iPad, which he controls his music selection that plays. Just the vision of that is hilarious to me. And he put on the national anthem. And Trump said, "This is the January 6th choir." And Zuckerberg stood and put his hand over his heart while this played. I mean, just think about that.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a wow moment, right? Talk about the fealty that's coming out of Silicon Valley. It's stunning. I mean, every time I think about that.
It is. And it's not just stunning because, just on its face it is. But when you think about what the tech industry at least for more than 20 years has kind of sold the American public, it has been, this is where democracy happens, right? This is social media, and the sort of online communication experience is how we avoid ever having to worry that the government will fully control what we think or what we say. That was the kind of propaganda that the industry used, is that this is where free speech happens, and this is where you can actually speak and engage with other people without any kind of limitations. And the defense for the kind of deferential treatment that they've gotten and the responsibility that they have managed to dodge that every other industry would have to face for causing harm has been based on this notion that we are going to be the bulwark against any political headwinds that happen in the United States or elsewhere. We are going to be where democracy stays. And you see what has happened. I mean, how quickly and how obviously the entire industry has turned to say, well, what we mean by that is we are going to do Trump's bidding, right? And that is really what they're announcing, what they have made clear. And yet they are still trying to pretend that somehow they have independence or they have some kind of democratic commitments, or that they have any kind of commitments to an informed public or a reasoned public or an enlightened public. It is maddening that they have managed to shore up the kind of power that they have and the influence that they've had based on this bait and switch.
Yeah, and it's Trump's bidding, but their own bidding. I mean, Elon Musk's greatest investment was the $300 million or so that he put into Trump's campaign.
Yes.
I mean, he was a kingmaker, and that investment has come back to him in spades. You know, it reminds us of Russia when we look at the oligarchy, and you know that's what's happening here. There's this broligarchy, if you will, all these rich, uber wealthy, youngish, white tech bros, and they know exactly how to play Trump like a fiddle, just like everybody else in the world, I guess. That's scary.
I think that's right. I mean, because he's incredibly easy to exploit. I mean, when self-interest is really your only principle, it's incredibly easy to exploit that. But yes, I mean, that Trump gets what he wants. The tech industry gets what they want. The convergence here and the collaboration here, as you're saying, it's not because there's necessarily force. It is basically because these are like-minded people who have like-minded projects. And the conglomeration that we're witnessing right now, right, it's not an unwilling coalition. It's an incredibly willing coalition, because on a certain level, whether they may turn up their nose at certain aspects of Trumpism or not, what ultimately drives this entire oligarch class is the same thing, and it's self-interest, and it's profit, and it is essentially elitism, right? These are people who don't actually want democracy and who fear democracy and hate democracy, and now they control basically all of the communication channels that we have, and they control aspects of the government, and the government controls aspects of us. That has never really been true before, I think, in American history.
Yeah, I mean, you write a lot about abuse of power in both the public and private sectors, not just in government, but among these handful of technology companies that we're talking about. The fear is that they're not only shaping how people communicate, but they're shaping how people think.
Definitely. And this is, again, it is that the subtlety of it. I mean, it's not particularly subtle, but it's subtle if this is what you have, if this is the information environment that you have established so thoroughly that we have entire generations that have never known what it's like not to be in it, right? There is no such thing as a technology that merely helps along what humans would want to do otherwise, right? It, of course, shapes us, right? People create the technology that they want, or certain people create the technology that they want. And then the rest of us are all shaped and influenced and impacted by what that technology does. There's no separating the products that are being used or the channels that are being opened here from the wants and desires of the population. They're all meshed together at this point. But that also means that they're neither mere reflections, nor are they merely sort of top-down control by these industry leaders. It is a mix of the people who are, once again, at the very top of a hierarchy, who are trying to preserve their place in that hierarchy and who have consolidated more and more power to be able to do that. And that is something that all of us should be suspicious about. But one of the reasons why that suspicion has been toned down and the flashing red lights about what is happening have really been muted is because the very sources that could help us discover that, right? Media, education, social media, they're all controlled by the same people with the same interests. And so that makes it really difficult for people to even see what is happening, because they're being sold a story that says, no, actually, this is a golden era, right, of technology. It's a golden era for communication. It's a golden era for democracy, even though the reality around us really should be making it clear that nothing could be farther from the truth.
You know, usually when I go to bed, I check the news, I'll check Twitter, and then inevitably I end up in the Instagram Reels rabbit hole. And that adds like 40 minutes to my night. And I saw something last night, which was an AI generated like 3 to 4 minute clip of The Office, the cast of The Office, sitting around the set. They were talking about current events and Trump and the Supreme Court and the immigration. It was the best AI-generated video I've ever seen. It was incredible. So my question is, with these AI-generated deep fakes, impersonations, and synthetic media becoming nearly impossible to detect what's real and what's not, are our legal institutions anywhere close to being prepared for what's coming? Because it just seems like absolute madness is coming.
No, and it isn't just are they prepared for what's coming. They have our legal institutions, our legislators in particular, are responsible for what is coming because they did not act in time. It is not because there weren't people who were advocating and pushing for there to be guardrails, right? That we're saying before you have the AI kind of revolution saying, look, here's a really crude version of this technology, but in 10 years, it's going to advance. There were plenty of people who saw that coming. And we're saying we need to do something about this now. You can't fix this problem after you've unleashed it on the world. But instead, what you got was legislators who, let's say, especially members of Congress, who are in a revolving door relationship with the tech industry. So there, again, you've got this mutual benefit, right? That many of the people who will leave Congress will go straight into tech companies, and many of the people who come from tech companies will go into Congress. What you have is this unwillingness to ever have said ahead of time, let's ensure that the terrible things don't happen. And let's not put ourselves in the position of trying to race behind technology. We can have laws that actually are anticipatory, that do have some sense of what's coming around the corner and trying to stop it. But over and over again, there was just a complete abdication of responsibility on the part of legislators to do anything. I mean, to be fair, I should say there's an abdication on the part of the majority of legislators, because there have always been people, especially those who have been tuned into the kinds of consequences for vulnerable populations that almost every thoughtless innovation is going to have, who've tried to push for reform before things get terrible, but they've been outvoted. And so, yes, we're not prepared because we have made it so that nothing can prepare us and nothing can control the way that technological innovations are racing ahead of us. So we are now in a position where we are looking at the wreckage, and the wreckage is just getting started, and trying to figure out how to reverse engineer our way out of it. And that's why it feels so impossible, because our legislators have failed us and have put us in this position, and they continue to insist that if we were to regulate the tech industry, that we're regulating innovation, we're stifling progress. And as long as we buy into that, as long as we allow that to be a sentiment that goes unchallenged, I think we're just going to get ourselves further and further into this dystopia.
Yeah. I think the problem is that the people who control power today know that they're the ones that benefit by the abuse of this technology. Not that Democrats are perfect and they don't spin or stretch the truth or on occasion lie, but they don't do what Trump and this GOP has done. They are totally okay breaking laws, violating laws, grifting, and outright lying. I mean, yesterday, J.D. Vance sat at a forum and said that Nixon was taken down by the deep state. And I'm sitting there watching it and going like, no, he was taken down by his own corruption and the Republicans in Congress who actually had a spine who went to him and said, either you quit or we take you down. And so they have learned that there's a good chunk of this population that will believe anything they say. Trump himself said it, over a decade ago. If I shoot someone on Fifth Avenue, I will not lose any support. And he was largely right to this day, despite everything he's done. And so that's the problem. Like, they're not going to regulate this stuff because they gain from it. All you got to do is look at the campaign videos against James Tallarico in Texas right now, and you'll see what's in it for them. It's like there's no more morality or ethics or an appreciation or respect for standards and norms and boundaries. It's just all gone. Civility is gone. It's all this toxic partisan crap, largely coming, in my opinion, from one side. We have this big election coming up in 5 months now, and we've seen election workers, we've seen judges, prosecutors, journalists, and academics become targets of coordinated online harassment and threats. How much of a threat does all that pose to the rule of law itself?
It's a pretty serious threat, and it's not new, but it is getting worse. And again, I guess one of the only benefits of how terrible things are right now is that certain things that were less visible have become visible, because it is important to understand that these kinds of attacks have been going on for a long time, especially focused on female candidates, on individuals of color. And now we're saying that it's gone completely mainstream, right? That once these techniques are perfected on vulnerable populations, they will always be used on everyone else too. And so now we're swimming in this kind of environment where everything can be faked and everything can be weaponized. And so now we're all going to suffer from it. But people have been suffering from it for a long time. But back to the specifics of how much of a threat does it pose to the rule of law? How much does it pose a threat to, I think, just the idea of society altogether? You think about how, again, go back in history, right? Think about Hannah Arendt writing about how Nazi Germany happened, right? How does totalitarianism take control? And one of the things that she said was, well, it takes control not just by lying to the people. It takes control because if you can't distinguish between truth and falsity anymore, it's not just that people are going to believe lies, it's that they've lost the capacity to either to tell the difference between truth and lies or to care about the difference between truth and lies. That's when you've lost society. You've lost any real hope that the rule of law can survive. If people don't want to know what the truth is, and if they have no capacity to distinguish between truth and falsity, then they can simply be manipulated by the strongest. And by strongest here, I just mean in the sense of exploitative forces, the elite forces. And at that point, you've really lost democracy because you've taken away the tools of critical thinking, of independent thought that you would need to be able to hold your legislators or leaders accountable and to establish solidarity and to remember what it meant to be part of a democratic community and a community that cares about progress and mutual welfare, right? So it's a very serious threat because we have now created a political environment where if you are trying to enter that field, you are subjecting yourself to extraordinary levels of harassment and danger. And again, that has been true for certain people for a very long time, but now it's becoming true for virtually everyone. And at the end of that process, we have to ask ourselves who's going to be willing to stand for those positions, and who is likely to actually be victorious in those kinds of situations, and what does that mean for the representation of our society's interests?
Yeah. Well, we see Trump and his henchmen undermining the integrity of the electoral system. We've seen him do that with the media. We now see him doing it with the judiciary. It really seems dangerous when the public starts to question the integrity of the judiciary.
I suppose we could think of it as being dangerous that you're questioning the integrity of the judiciary. I think if the public were not questioning the integrity of this judiciary, given, depending on what we're talking about, right? If we were just talking about the Supreme Court, right? Do we want to question his legitimacy? I think we would, right?
Absolutely.
So we want to be careful about what we mean when we say, do we want people to question this or not? I think the difficulty here is figuring out when is it a genuine attempt to hold our leaders accountable, and when is it an attempt to discredit and delegitimize leadership so that we can't actually get anything remotely like democratic representation. So I think we want to separate those things, right? That when you have a government, a regime that is saying from the top down, when Trump is saying, I don't like those judges, or I don't want those people to be in office, those are my enemies, and you have people doing his dirty work for him and then believing in that because he said so, I think the reason why we have to be concerned about that is because that looks exactly like what it looks like. If you saw that happening in another country, that would look like a dictator. That would look like someone who was saying, the only real rule of law is what the leader says, what the dear leader says.
Well, he said, I am the law. He literally has said those words. Yeah.
Right. He could not be more clear about the fact that he thinks of himself as a dictator. It is his followers who seem to refuse, and I should say his followers, and I think a certain kind of complacent or overly optimistic kind of middle of the road liberal who also cannot see the danger, right? That we don't want to believe that we are in as bad of a position as we're in. So it isn't just the hardcore MAGA supporters, it's also everyone else who's being carried along by this kind of sense of disbelief that surely things are not that bad. And so I think we do have to wake up to how bad things are. That, again, lessons of history tell us that if the reason that someone is being removed from office or jailed or surveilled or harassed is because a leader has decided that he doesn't like the criticism of his position, or they don't like the dissent, then we should all know exactly what we're dealing with. That is an authoritarian regime, and we have to resist that, and we have to call it what it is. And unfortunately, I think there's not enough of those alarm bells that are being set off, right, by these kinds of actions, because this is what it looks like when authoritarianism takes over a country.
And who's to blame for that? Is the media failing at its job? Because you could spend an evening watching the cable news panel shows, and you could literally walk away going, oh, okay, I just got the perspective of two sides, because that's what they do. Whereas, some of us could sit there and pull our hair out of our heads because it's like, why did Trump do what he did today? Because he's a sociopath, because he's an autocrat, because he's a dictator wannabe. That's the answer. Obviously, they can't say that, but it does seem like the media is not his enemy. The media is his friend, because they are not doing their job to hold him accountable in getting to that truth and reality that you spoke of before.
Well, yeah, I mean, when the media does the two sides, right? When you get the interview in the diner about why did this person vote for Trump, this kind of journalism, right? And I want to put air quotes around that. That's not journalism. This idea that there's some kind of balance that you always need to present isn't journalism. The task of journalism is to find the truth. It's to question authority. It's to fact check. It's to actually see if there's evidence for the claims being made. The pivot, I think, to two sides journalism or both sides journalism is one of the worst things, I think, to happen to the United States. It's all of a piece, right, with what we've seen in terms of social media destroying traditional media, but also traditional media absconding its own responsibilities, and they're becoming this. Again, there's the base, there's the supporters, the diehards for Trump that you probably can't reach. But then you've got all of these people sort of in the middle or on the edge who are letting this happen too, because they believe at the end of the day that the most important thing is that we present both sides, as if, as if when we think about authoritarian regimes in other countries, as if that's the perspective we'd have there, right? Would you say that what you needed to really do in Nazi Germany was make sure that everyone was sympathetic to the other side? That make sure that, well, Hitler has some good points, right? Is that what you really think should have happened? Do you think that
My daughter always says, you never want to start a conversation with, the good thing about Hitler was.
Right. And you openly have those kinds of conversations going on right now in the United States. And it should seem ridiculous and alarming to all of us that is not the question, right? That we are not dealing with a neutral environment where it's just, oh, can we disagree about certain forms of tax, right? As opposed to, can we disagree about the nature of democracy itself and of whether or not other human beings should be treated like human beings? That is a different kind of conversation. So whose fault is it? I mean, it's always the fault of the people seizing power. That's one, but it is the fault of the people who refuse to point out what is happening, right? It would be good if we had a media establishment that thought it was its job to hold power to account. Mm-hmm. But it's also important to note that the more that power gets centralized, the less freedom that media has to do those things. It's not as if Trump hasn't attacked the media when it has disobeyed him, right? Think to how many ways that Trump has punished certain news outlets for infractions like not using his preferred terminology for bodies of water, right? Or simply because he finds them nasty, right? We see all the insults that he delivers to female reporters, and no one stands up for them, and no one pushes back and says, this is not an acceptable way for the president to treat the media, right? All of these things are passing by without many people taking as much note as they should of how dangerous this is. So is it a failure? Yes. And it's also a failure of our ability to see that anyone who does try to break away or does try to do their job does get attacked and harassed and persecuted. So it's all of a piece, and all of those aspects of this regime have to be dealt with and have to be considered, and the root of the problem has to be faced, which is we are in the grip of an authoritarian regime, and we have to take that seriously. We have to take that for what it is.
Yeah, I think the media knows exactly what it's dealing with. I think it's just been fear and intimidation that has come out of this administration, which has forced capitulation, not just in the media with all these lawsuits, but with law firms, with universities. I mean, things are a little bit more stable today than they were a year ago, where we were just coming out of all those lawsuits and Doge and Elon Musk and the craziness that was taking place in the first several months of Trump 2.0. But I think a lot of that, especially in the media today, still exists, because you're right. You know, you watch Gaggle and you see him call a woman stupid or, you know, whatever, and nobody says anything. I always say, like, why doesn't the next reporter either just ask the same question that the previous reporter did, or start off by saying, that was uncalled for, with all due respect, sir. She's doing her job and you should do yours and answer our question. But they're afraid, and they let him ramble on and on and on. And then when he's done, they just go to the next question. He could have just said the moon is made of cheese.
Yes.
They go to the next question. Like, not, sir, the moon is not made out of cheese. And that's the alternative universe we're living in right now.
And I think that what you just said there is a huge part of the problem that we're, the problem is the normalization, right? It is that is things happen, multiple things happen in a given day under the Trump regime, any one of which that would have been a news cycle in previous years. The idea that as a shared reality matter, right? That we're back to this question of, you know, what does it mean for our society to hold itself together? One thing it has to do is be able to say certain things are true and not true, and to adequately respond when someone has said something that is false or that is incredibly something that is harassing or something that is threatening, that we need to be able to say what that is. And the inability to be able to articulate that is that massive effect that Trump has had on our entire public discourse, that we treat crazy things as if they weren't crazy. We treat absurd things as if they weren't absurd. We treat evil things as if they weren't evil, right? And when you said this about, you know, why doesn't the next reporter do something differently? That, I think, too, is the question we should be asking, which is, we have always known who in our society has less power, right? It's quite clear, and Trump has made an entire administration out of misogyny and racism, right? We know this. So we know who he's going to be attacking. We know who is going to be the most vulnerable. And he just demonstrates this every single day. So why isn't it the people who have more privileges in that sense, the people who do have the benefit of being elites, or at least not vulnerable in those same ways, why aren't they doing more? Why aren't the people with more power doing more to hold the people in power accountable? And I think that is what we need to be asking. It isn't a kind of monolith effect on society. There are certain people who could stand up, and if they did, would be risking less and having more of an impact. And the real question is, why aren't they doing that? Because some of the bravest people right now, speaking out against this administration, putting themselves on the line, are people who have everything to lose and really don't have the kind of security of the privileges that other people might have, the law firms, the elite universities, the media conglomerates that Trump is brokering deals for, right? The people who are actually being brave are the people who have none of those things. And so I think we do need to be more judgmental about how the people who have the ability to stand up and say something are not doing it, and they should be.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the courts for a second. At least on the lower levels, they've repeatedly blocked or slowed major parts of his agenda, yet his administration often pushes the limits of executive authority anyway. Do you see that the judicial guardrails are holding, or are we watching them gradually and appreciably weaken?
We are certainly seeing them weaken, but I do think it is important to recognize the strengths that some of these judges have displayed, that there have been truly principled members of the judiciary who have not only done the right thing, but have done so in a way that is so eloquent and powerful that I think, you know, in 50 years, 100 years, if we still have a country, we'll be looking at those decisions and saying there were still some people in this society that were doing the right thing. And that includes, you know, many judges who were appointed by Republicans. This is not a partisan, should not have ever been a partisan issue. There are certain principles that we all used to, at least in theory, agree to. And these are ones that we should be sticking to. So we've seen incredible, I think, acts of bravery. I only say that they're brave because they are just doing their jobs, but we know that just doing your job when it is something that displeases Trump could mean it could cost you everything. It's not as though this is a president who won't hesitate to threaten you and your family if you do something that he disapproves of. So anyone who, with any power, who is holding the line against authoritarianism is taking a tremendous risk, and some of them are still doing it. And a lot of these lower courts have really been doing that work that's holding the last remnants of our democracy together. But my concern is that when you have a Supreme Court that is as powerful as it is and as captured as it is, to some degree, this won't matter, right? And I shouldn't say it won't matter, but that ultimately it isn't going to hold us together. And the concern I also have is that judicial processes tend to be slow. And, by the time this regime has done the things that it's going to do, it may get caught out later. It may get pulled back later. But then look at how much damage is already done. When you are allowing your federal agents to shoot people in the streets for peacefully demonstrating, no matter what consequences might come of that later on, that has still happened. That is still a government that thinks that it's allowed to do that. And that is terrifying.
Yeah. It's obvious with the abdication of the Republican Congress, we've just put, too much expectation and hope in the judiciary as the guardrail or the only guardrail. When historians look back on Trump's second term, do you think they'll see a president who aggressively tested constitutional limits or one who succeeded in fundamentally and dangerously expanding presidential power?
And there are legal scholars right now, and I think historians right now who are calling it for what it is, that this is a complete destruction of the rule of law, of constitutional principles, that there shouldn't multiple tactics of this administration have been so far beyond the pale that it is a regime of lawlessness. There are people who say that right now, and I think that they are right about this. The difficulty, I think, is what we have always had trouble with, I think, in the United States, because of our own mythology, is we don't recognize how many of the sins that we are now seeing in explicit detail now have roots in failures and acts from before. That there is a sense of collective responsibility that we've never really embraced in the United States. And it comes back to the question of, if you think that the real supporters of this regime are the minority, and I believe that this is true, why are we still seeing our society being taken over by it? And I think the answer is because there's a part of what Trump is offering that people either don't get upset enough about or benefit at least passively from. And it's that sense of, well, you are very special. You, those who were there at the beginning, right? This entire history and tradition romanticization, right? Like what would the founding fathers have done? Or let's think about our history let's celebrate America. Look at what all of that pageantry is really supposed to reinforce for us. Think of the days when white wealthy men controlled everything. Didn't you love those days? Aren't you angry about the fact that someone who doesn't look like you or that you think is subordinate to you got your job or was better at you in college or just seems to be more successful, more intelligent, more something, right? There's something about that appeal that isn't just political. It is activating certain things in our society. Misogyny, racism, elitism in terms of wealth, all of those things are contributing to the populism, if you want to call it that, of Trump.
Yeah, that's why they say "Make America Great Again." That's what they're referring to in those days.
It's right there on the slogan, right? That you have to ask yourself, what does that mean, right? And that so much of these charged conversations, again, there's the radical aspect of it, of the MAGA, diehards, right? But that isn't really what's propelling this. There are a lot of so-called liberals and civil libertarians and others who are saying, well, let's just not be partisan about this. Let's not be so divided. Let's be civil. Let's have both sides. It's true that universities are too liberal, and let's talk more about how conservatives are oppressed. That isn't just coming from his supporters. It's coming from kind of middle, right, in America. And I think that's where we're losing. That's the opportunity that we're losing here to understand that that's the appeal and the reason why people are contributing or going along with so much of what should be unacceptable is because it isn't hurting them. And it's because it's not it isn't actually out of step with the vision that they on some level may also have for themselves and for this country. The deep resentments against women and people of color that really are hard to confront, right? We're back to the beginning of, people don't like to be called racist. They don't like to be called sexist. And that has become worse in some ways than looking at the evidence of racism and sexism. So that's a collective problem and not just one of the Trump faithful.
My last question, and maybe we'll be able to end on a positive note. Maybe. Are you more optimistic or pessimistic today than you were a year ago about the Constitution's ability to withstand a president like Trump, who is abusing his power and pushing the limits this way?
I am probably more or less in the same place that I was, but that is partly because my belief in the Constitution is probably more qualified than most people's. It is part of my work is intended to show that the Constitution is held together by the people who interpret it, right? And I don't just mean that we get to project our own values onto the Constitution as we change as a society, because we need stability. We need a document that unites us. It is important to believe in a document, given the fact that we are in a kind of path dependence already, that the Constitution is what it is. It is the founding document. What we, I think, have to remember is that whatever good things have come from the Constitution have come not because the framers gave them to us. They have come not because of the people who have tried to defend their original interpretations of what they think those framers wanted. They have come from people who have rejected the use of the Constitution to exploit and subordinate other people. So I think about those people because they have made progress, right? The entire project of Reconstruction was worth it does deserve our respect, right? As unfinished as it was, but Reconstruction is something we need to think about in a very live sense. We need to reconstruct our Constitution, and we need to think about what does it mean to drag that Constitution into modern times, not just because we have developments in our society that the framers couldn't have thought of, but because we hopefully have learned from our history. We have learned from our history that it is not true that a democracy can survive if it is only for certain people, that the only way that you get democracy is if you have a radical conception of equality, that everyone, in fact, right, has to be included. We the people has to be everybody unqualified. That is something we learn from history because we know what happens when you exclude. We know what happens when you subordinate someone. We know what happens when you take a category and set it outside the law. So I think that the positive aspect of this is something that I think about that George Washington said about the Constitution after the project was completed. He was writing to his nephew and he said, I don't think our Constitution is perfect, but I also believe that future generations are going to be wiser than we are, and they are going to be the ones who are going to bring the Constitution into what it needs to be for their times. So if one of the framers of the Constitution, if our first leader could have recognized that to say, future generations will know more than we do, then I think that is some reason to be optimistic.
Yeah, well, number one, what I hear from you is that it's not going to get worse. So I'm going to put that in the optimistic, positive bucket. Number two, I agree with what you just said. We the people, hopefully, we the people are going to be wiser in November because we control everything. It's the one day of the year that the janitor and the billionaire have the same exact power, and I hope people understand that. Marianne, thanks for coming on. This was a great conversation. I do hope you'll come back and chat with us again.
Thanks so much for having me on.
All righty, take care. This episode was produced and edited by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-produced by Maddie Rosenberg and Jen Hammoud for Radio Free Rhinecliff, with additional editing by Maddie Rosenberg, music by Andrew Hollander, and graphic design by Cricket Langell. And with a special thanks to our sponsor, The Epicurean. Again, thanks for listening. Please rate and review wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to the Backroom with Andy Ostroy YouTube channel, where you can watch full videos of our interviews. See you next time.